Welcome to the Passive House Podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House Podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's it going, Zach?
It's good. It's good. The kids are back in school, which is really nice. Have a little more structure in our lives. Although our daughter is headed off to college in about 10 days. So for the first year, which is a massive transition for us.
Yes.
So anyway, it's good.
Indeed. My daughter also is looking at universities at the moment, and haven't quite managed to get her into engineering, but nonetheless, she's very much interested in going back to Canterbury University, which I have some affinity with, so I'm relatively pleased with that. But
nice.
Big steps.
Nice.
That'll be next year for us.
Yeah. Exciting.
All right. We've got a great interview to get into this week. I was recently down at a conference all about retirement village, build developers, owners. It was the Retirement Village Association of New Zealand. And that is very topical for some of what we're going to be talking about this week, but also more than that, just about buildings that are designed to look after all of us and look after people well. And really enjoyed listening to that. So we'll get into that. But before we do, we've got a few people to thank.
We do indeed. A big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you, too, to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingwe Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, Zola Windows, and our champion sponsors as well, Bewizo, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050.
All right. Zach, how did you come across Nathan St. Germain?
Yeah, so Nathan is an architect based in Western Pennsylvania, and we have, crossed paths at conferences and stuff in the past. But Nathan actually reached out to us about this project that he's finishing up now, and this whole topic of aging in place and universal design and how it connects with Passive House and health and dignity and aging and all sorts of great stuff. So it was a really fun conversation. I think introduced a lot of new ideas for us here at Passive House Podcast. And I think people hopefully will find it interesting. So let's take a listen.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today on the Passive House Accelerator Podcast. My name is Nathan St. Germain, and I am the owner of a boutique architectural firm called Studio St. Germain. And we are based out of a town called Sewickley, Pennsylvania, which is about 10 miles north of the city of Pittsburgh. And we specialize in sustainability and high performance building. And when I had founded the firm 10 years ago, and when I had done that, I was really thinking about, in terms of mission, vision, values, around the philosophy of building to give back. And really that's kind of the core principle and the common thread that we try to weave throughout all of our projects. And what building to give back means is, for us, is our commitment to architecture as an art and to architecture as a public good. And the public good piece of it is really where the sustainability and the high performance building really dovetails. And one of the other things that we're trying to do and work on is this idea around this paradigm shift in the public consciousness, in that it's not how you are going to take care of the building, but rather how is the building taking care of you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And as you know, we all spend about 90% of our time inside of a building, and nothing really impacts our minds and our bodies more than the built environment that surrounds us. And in our project that we're going to be talking about today, one of the ideas behind that is around this concept of aging in place, and how high performance building and passive house can assist in the execution of this concept and the therapeutic environment. And I think the therapeutic environment is a really important term as it relates to aging in place, and that therapeutic value is really kind of intrinsic to high performance buildings and passive house.
Right. And you mentioned aging in place, and I think that probably lots of folks have heard that term, maybe are very familiar with it. It's certainly something that I'm beginning to think about more and more as my hair gets grayer and grayer, and I have fewer of them. But could you just provide a quick explanation for what is aging in place and what are some key principles of design around aging in place? And then we can start exploring this really cool project and how you're combining that with Passive House, but maybe just as to provide the foundation. Yeah. What is aging in place?
Sure. No, it's a great question. Really, for us, it ties particularly to a home environment, the living environment. And, as we all get older, and the how we live and the livability around where we currently reside becomes really important. And ideally, most people, as they age, they want to stay within the place that they are familiar with and they are comfortable with. And sometimes those environments, as we age, don't always conform to some of those needs as one ages. Oftentimes simple things like accessibility, or, stairs going, if bedrooms are up on a second level where most of the programming on the ground floor is primarily around living, dining, and kitchen, as an example. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that does come up for a lot of people as time goes on. And I think the idea of being able to stay in a place that one is really comfortable and not having to move at those types of times is really important in becoming a concept in which architecturally and architects can really respond to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I think that one of the cool things about what we're about to dive into is this expansion of the understanding of aging in place. So I think that before talking with you more, when we first had our conversation a little bit ago about this, my understanding of aging in place was really focused on universal design. And I think actually in some ways it still is, right? Because Passive House, I think basically part of what you're doing is expanding the understanding of universal design to Passive House. But by universal design, we mean things like that. If you think about the needs of someone aging in a home and accessibility as you're designing from the get-go, you can make decisions that are good for everybody, regardless of whether they're aging yet or not. Well, we're all aging, but whether they're older yet or not. So things like barrier-free design, which is really consistent with modern design, open floor plans and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Just the simple moves like using your choice in the door handle instead of a door knob, which is easier to use. Like those kinds of principles, and like you say, thinking about where bedrooms go, so that you're not creating an unnecessary barrier of stairs to folks. So this And so that idea of something that is good just is also, like good design for aging in place or for accessibility can also be just good design for everybody. You're
Absolutely.
expanding in this project. So thank you for kind of helping me provide just a little bit of introduction. And now let's dive in to the project, if you wouldn't mind. It's really exciting. The Wilkinsburg Passive House project. Tell us about it. Why is aging in place important there? And how are you combining that with Passive House? Why? I mean, how does all this come together?
Yeah, I think to kind of go back to what you had originally mentioned in terms of like barrier-free design and accessibility, I think that for us kind of falls into the category of what we like to call livability, right? And we think a lot about livability in terms of those things, like being able to access all of the spaces within the home without too much effort. There's not like that term barrier free, right? There's no barrier to being able to do that. But I think there are also other architectural elements that are important to livability in terms of aesthetic, beauty, light, right? The things that we're all kind of can understand when you are really in a really well lit, nice aesthetic environment. Mm-hmm. It's enjoyable to be there, right? And I think one of the other pieces of livability that now starts to tie a little bit more into building science and building performance and things, some of the benefits of Passive House is, acoustics. Acoustics become pretty important, especially when we're living in a denser environment, where there's a lot of noise around us and things of that nature, to be able to minimize that. Again, there's a real comfort behind that livability. Now, some of the things that start to really come into play for Passive House as it relates to, again, the therapeutic environment, and that's a term that I've used already, and I'm using it again because I think it's really a bit of the hub in the hub and spoke model. And one of the spokes that comes off of that we all know is airtightness, right? And things like airtightness and thermal bridge free construction really tie back to thermal comfort, right? Mm-hmm. And thermal comfort's important for all of us, but especially as we get older, because our sensitivity to the changes in the indoor environment, whether it be like cold or hot, can really affect or emphasize even more. And indoor air quality, right? And having a designed HVAC system that is going to produce that superior level of indoor air quality is really tying for us back to well-being, right? Where you've got energy recovery ventilation, where you've got outdoor air coming in that's preconditioned, and it's fresh air and it's filtered, and it improves the indoor air quality, which, as we know, can reduce the transmission of pathogens and things of that nature that can tie to, bronchitis, or people that suffer from asthma or allergies. And then, of course, there's the energy side of it, right? Where we've got, a reduced carbon footprint, and the ideas around the efficiency, the energy efficiency, and things like the annual expenditures for that, right? And again, as we are getting older, living on fixed incomes, those become important factors around, especially if you're in inflationary times, or, the idea around future proofing, right? Where if those costs are really reduced significantly because of the things, the aforementioned, then one doesn't have to worry about if that changes, like how will then they, be affected, or how are they going to cover potentially those increased costs?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well said. When you kind of teed this up, you mentioned the notion of dignity. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that I understand is something that's important to the client. And the client, I think, has had some insights around that and why, and I think has driven part of the approach here with Passive House. Could you tell us a little bit about the client and why aging in place kind of designed Passive House is something that she sees as important?
Yeah. So the client specifically had come to us very well educated on Passive House and the value of it, and her exposure to Passive House specifically in energy efficiency and sustainability came from when she had lived and worked in Europe, in both Germany and France. So when she had come back to the United States and purchased the building that she was currently residing in. Right now, it is still under construction. We're kind of at the tail end of construction. But when we were first talking about the project and the concepts and the reasons why, because that's one of the questions that we always ask our clients at the very beginning is around why. And oftentimes people don't have that figured out, or they don't respond to it in a very kind of clear and concise way. And when we asked that of her, she really had a fantastic answer. And she was at the time, had lived in this section of Pittsburgh for a good amount of time. And she was comfortable with the neighborhood, knew her way around, and wanted to maintain that, right? Friends, relationships that are close by, and little things, just, knowing your way around and being comfortable with that. And in addition to that, around this idea of dignity, in the way that she had explained it to me, was that as one ages, and the things that in your living environment and also your life and things that, the independence that you have by just being able to get in a car and drive where you'd like to go, or things of that nature, slowly those things start to get taken away. And that's really where the dignity piece comes in.
Yeah.
And having and transforming something that from a place of it's not as accessible, the aesthetic, the beauty, the light, the acoustics, the building performance and thermal comfort things we're all talking about, is there a way to transform that through the architecture and the design and the performance so that those things aren't taken away, right? Where you have more control of them than one would in, let's say, a senior living facility, right? That you're kind of moving into. You may not have any choice in whether your unit has an ERV or not, right? So I think those things were really important, to her, and the possibility of being able to accommodate those things were more things that you could live with versus without.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think that, so two things come to mind. One is just the ways, and some of them are probably intangible or maybe difficult to measure, but are real, that this house that you're creating together can support the client's health, and And that is part of, I think, one of the drivers of losing some of that independence has to do with health. And
Yes.
And so a healthier environment, better air, those things as simple as being able to sleep better. I mean, I think that we often discount the power of sleep, but you mentioned the acoustic qualities, but basically just the fact that it's quiet inside, and also that it's not overheated during the summer, those sorts of things, all of those have provide a healthy haven for people. And then as we have these, wildfire smoke events and other things, just being more resilient to the climate impacts, all of that is so important. The second thing that just is so clear, I think, in listening to you talk about this, is how this has impacted you and your practice, and that this notion of the building taking care of you.
Yes.
So can you tell us more about what that's been like?
Yeah, in this particular, I'll give an example in this project that's very specific to our client, where she had mentioned that she has a condition where that's tied to humidity, right? Mm-hmm. Where when the humidity gets to a certain point, like a low humidity, she gets some irritation on her skin, as well as she says she had mentioned to us that her eyes watered and it was painful. And was there anything that could be done in designing of the HVAC system that could respond to that? And so when we were designing the system along with our mechanical engineer, that was one thing that we were really very tuned into around, okay, can we set a tight band with a humidification and dehumidification system as part of the overall HVAC system that can respond when that humidity is not ideal. And if we could do that, then she won't feel that uncomfort, right?
Yeah.
Or that pain. So that's an example of, I think, the power of architecture and design around this idea of this building is taking care of her in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's a very specific example, but it's one that I think concretizes the idea.
Mm-hmm. And
we can, the therapeutic environment, there's been a lot of studies, done in, hospitals and, even, learning environments and other type of environments where that it really is taking care of the occupants within it. Right. And it's coming from a place that we call like human-centric design. Right. Because it's really about the people who are residing in them, and whether it be a work environment, a living environment, a therapeutic environment, like I said, like a hospital or something like that. And it really ties back ultimately, to health and well-being. And I think that where we've seen a shift in our work and in our focus is really around going from a green building movement to a healthy building movement.
Mm-hmm.
And, the green building movement at the time was really focused around primarily the energy, right? And the consumption and the emissions. And it's much easier to quantify that than it is some of these kind of it's harder to calculate thermal comfort because people have different thermal comfort ranges, as an example, right? So what might be really comfortable to one may not be to someone else. But there are, general rules of thumb in which we all have to kind of design towards. But I do think the healthy building movement is really the difference between the two. It's not that we're ignoring the energy or the efficiency and all those things,
right?
But it's really more about the people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's really who we are designing for. Are the occupants and the people who are spending 90% of their time inside. So we feel, and I feel on a personal side, a responsibility to be able to incorporate as much of these concepts as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I think, is where this idea of this expanded notion of universal design kind of comes to a head. And it's interesting. It seems like, and in this case with this client, you do have something that's very data driven and measurable
Mm-hmm.
around the humidity because of the specifics of her medical condition with the kind of sensitivity to that.
Right.
But you have where that is the good design for her is good design for all of us. And so we may not, the rest of us, or some of us may not have the same sort of clear, like, I need this narrow band,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm not healthy, like in such a kind of clear and demonstrable way. But it is true for us too. Like we know
Exactly.
we know that band is good for all of us. So it's just it's interesting that it is this example of something that is really quantifiable that also helps kind of really drive it. And it seems like this has been a transformative experience for you in your practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also are, I say this all the time, because again, it's a core philosophy that we have, where you can't improve what you don't measure.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious about that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we are doing high performance building projects, and particularly Passive House, as you know, you are documenting and testing and analyzing the performance and the data and the metrics really intensely. And the power really comes into play when you've done that, right? Like we've done at Wilkinsburg and pursuing the ENERFIT certification. And now you have a baseline of this data that you can then use post-occupancy and really understand, okay, this is what the data was telling us in, the various energy modeling programs and all of that in a predicted form. But then now you've got a building with occupants, or in our case, this residence, where now what we're going to do is, after, a year, go back and say, in a post occupancy evaluation, and start looking at the data again and making any adjustments and learning from that in terms of, okay, well, this is what was predicted and this is what is actually happening. And also getting feedback from our client in terms of how are some of these concepts that have been realized working? Like, what is working? What may not be working as well as we had intended? And what can we do to improve it? And then continue to measure that, right? Whether it be from indoor air quality monitoring in real time to getting feedback from our client on, these specific targets that we're trying to hit, and really understanding from her, is it taking care of her?
Right.
And also having the power of the information, the power of the data, and being able to respond to that if we're monitoring the indoor air quality, well, if there's indicators within those, what it is monitoring that can target, whether it's a ventilation problem at one particular point in time and what's going on or around. And is that a point where that can trigger a mechanical subcontractor to go out and just take a look at the system and make sure everything's, working accordingly. But that can be, almost like this preemptive way of looking at the information and responding to the information in a way that is providing this therapeutic environment.
Absolutely. And when is occupancy planned?
We are, as of right now, it's looking like we're probably going to be completed with the construction and occupied probably by the end of this year.
Nice. Cool. Well, we'll have to circle back with you and have a conversation about what you're learning from the monitoring and the adjustments and stuff, and dialing in this therapeutic building for your client. And you'd mentioned data points and EnterFit and targets. What was your blower door test? You had an initial one, right?
Yeah, we did. Our initial blower door was 0.28.
Right.
We were very happy about that.
That's awesome. So so that's 0.28 compared to 1.0, which is the EnterFit target, right? So that's 1.0 air changes per hour at 50 pascals of pressure. So you're almost like just a quarter of that nearly, which is amazing. Yeah. That's really congratulations.
Thank you so much. And we are planning, I think, in a couple weeks to have the final blower door.
Cool.
As well as the commissioning of the HVAC system. So things are looking really great in terms of getting our certification. We've gotten pre-certified already, and now we're at a point in time where the testing and documentation phase, and we're very happy with the results.
Yeah, good luck with that. It seems like you're on a good pathway there. That's awesome. Well, Nathan, this has really been great, inspiring project, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share it with everyone.
And that was Nathan St. Germain of Studio St. Germain. Really enjoyed that interview. Nathan is a certified Passive House consultant. He's also a licensed architect in Pennsylvania and New York, and multi-award winning by the looks of his website, which I encourage people to go and have a look at, because there's a great video on there about why he does what he does and what the studio stands for, which we got a little bit of a flavour of in this interview right from the top, making those comments about buildings that give back, and very much that philosophy of thinking about how buildings will look after us. He mentioned about, instead of us trying to have to look after buildings. I really like that idea. There was a big emphasis on just how much time we spend in buildings, and this is something that I've talked about a lot with architects as well, is to say that you will impact people's health and well-being one way or another. So you may as well do that with intention rather than just by accident and maybe not have such good results. So yeah, I got quite a lot in there, but are there any sort of standouts from you?
Oh, I mean, lots, and I think I probably expressed them partly in the conversation with Nathan. But I think that the idea of expanding this understanding of a universal design and that kind of concept that when you design for health needs or accessibility needs people, you can do it in a way that is universally beneficial to all people. And that's certainly the case with the quiet and the comfort and the dialing in the humidity to the healthy, that kind of healthy band.
Yeah.
That his client with her medical condition, it's like it's make or break for her. It's a big deal if it's too humid or it's too dry. But it's also important for all of us to avoid conditions that are too humid or too dry.
You mentioned about door handles, and I remember the first time I came across that, and it's something I hadn't even thought of until someone pointed it out to me. And we've actually, the old house that we've got, it's got a few door knobs, and most of the time, able-bodied person, completely fine. But there are times when I'm carrying things, or when we had young kids, and got one child under one arm, and you realize just how it seems like such a small thing and an inconsequential thing, but it can have huge implications. And more recently, looking after my parents who are starting to get a bit of arthritis, and on a recent trip home, I changed some of the taps in their home from knobs to levers, and it made such a huge difference to them just being able to do everyday things in their home. And it doesn't change the aesthetic. In fact, it probably, the taps we chose, it probably actually slightly updated the bathroom. So these aren't things that necessarily make a home look like an institution. And I think that's the key with that, the idea. I really like that term of universal design because it describes exactly what it is. It's not specifically accessible design. So there's a really good example that I saw when I first came across this concept, an organization that was promoting more accessible design and coined this term universal, or they didn't coin it, but they promoted the idea of universal design. And they showed some just really simple images of houses that had been adapted with things like, the classic one is a wheelchair ramp out the front. And it just stands out so much of this house that had steps up to the front door, and then someone's built a very for-purpose ramp, and it's right in your face, and it basically says a person with a wheelchair lives here. But then they showed another photo of a very similar house that had been landscaped so that there was level entry from the parking area to the front door. And it looked like any house that was completely desirable. And then you looked at it closely and noticed that there was level entry all the way from the car parking area to the front door. And I think that sums up good design and universal design, because it shouldn't be something that stands out and is obvious. It should be something that is aesthetically pleasing and works for everyone and will continue to work for everyone for a long period of time. And there are technical challenges with that, and we're facing that now with things like insulating a concrete slab and how you thermally break that and transition it from another hard surface. The other issue that I'm hearing a bit about now, when I was down at the Retirement Village Association conference, a lot of those companies who are developing retirement villages are very conscious of carbon. So they're actually trying to reduce the amount of concrete they're using. But to do a timber floor, the floor level is higher from the ground. So that presents a challenge when you're trying to do level entry and easy access to these dwellings. And I said, my response to that was kind of a little bit facetious, but it's basically saying, it sounds like you've got a really good design challenge there. And not saying you can't do that because you've got to have a timber floor. It's not necessarily a compromise. Just see it as a design challenge. And that's where good architecture should come in and solve these issues.
Right. And you have that mindset from the get-go to be addressing universal design questions.
Yeah. If you design these things, that's the key, is designing them from the start rather than then and tacking things on, because that's when it looks like a ramp has just been added after the fact, because it has. But if you incorporate we talk about integrated design all the time, and this is just another feature of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you mentioned the both doorknobs and the faucet. that has health implications too. Like or potentially, in many ways, I was just barbecuing chicken in the backyard the other day, and we have a doorknob, and if I have these gross kind of chicken marinade hands after
that raw chicken everywhere,
and then like, how do I get into my house without if there were just a lever I could use my elbow, it'd be all good. And the same is true for the sink, and so there are all sorts of probably unexpected benefits of that. Yeah,
and speaking of the indoor environment as well, he mentioned about the sensitivity to temperature, and just like you mentioned with the relative humidity, that's certainly more of an issue when you're got people who are less active or a little bit more frail, more sensitive. But it's also important for everyone. Everyone really appreciates, and you get more value from your home if you've got a more consistent temperature. So that's not just for really young people and elderly people, it's for all people. And all of that, of course, points back to the benefits of Passive House, because you get those outcomes from doing that.
That concept of dignity too, I thought was just like, that so many things start to be taken away as we age, and that this is a way to preserve some really fundamentally important aspects of being human, being alive.
And I know that's a big push coming back to that whole sector, because it is quite a growing, and it will be an increasing industry of villages, and it's a business, but there is a lot of advantages to keeping people in their homes for as long as possible, as long as it's healthy and practical and safe. And part of that is dignity and people's independence. But there are lots of other benefits of people being able to stay in a place. And often it is just an accumulation of those small things like access and the door handles, and having things at the entry level, so you don't have to negotiate a staircase for a bathroom and all the things the people need. I know of another case where people I know that designed a house in the first instance, the intention was to have the grandparents or the great grandparents move in, so they installed a lift and a whole another bathroom, or the ability to put a kitchen that was accessible in another floor. That never actually eventuated, but in the subsequent years, as they've become less mobile themselves, now they really value the fact they've got a lift, because they use it all the time. It was never intended for them in the first place, because they weren't the quote unquote old people at the time. But now they'll be able to stay in that house for a very long time, because it's got all those accessibility features that they didn't really think they would ever need. And I guess that's human nature as well. We don't ever think of ourselves as needing those things until we do.
Right.
And it's not just old people as well. People get injured. People.
No, exactly. I spent 3 months on crutches once, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
or having kids in a stroller. I mean, there are all sorts of
plenty of things with wheels.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really good stuff. Definitely go and check out Studio St. Germain. It's got some beautiful images in there, and a great little video, and also just some really nice ideas. And we've already talked about some of the words that he used, like dignity, but there's some really nice concepts that he encapsulates in his website. So a good person to follow. So thanks for bringing us that interview, Zach. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My pleasure. And we'll include a couple of links in show notes to both his website and also to the project page of Wilkinsburg Passive House.
Awesome. All right. What do we got coming up?
We have a lot coming up. So this week we have the first Project of the Month episode of the Passive House Accelerator live series. And it is going to be a really cool project that we actually have a YouTube video on as well. The project is Bank Lofts. The title of the series of this episode is Turning an Old Bank into Affordable Passive House Housing. So it's a really fascinating project. So we'll be joined by Juhi Lee Hartford of River Architects and by the builder, Josh Edmond. So that's this Wednesday, September 11th. We also we've We just announced the kind of new cadence of the different editions of Passive House Accelerator Live. So on the first Wednesday of every month, we will have a 101 session that remains unchanged. On the second Wednesday of the month, we have a Project of the Month episode. On the third Wednesday, we have Construction Tech. And we're adding, Ilka Cassidy is joining as a co-host for that team as well, which is really cool. And then on the fourth Wednesday, Zoe Kaufman and Carmel Pratt will co-host Next Up, which dives into what's next in Passive House construction and design and decarbonization. So that's going to be really fun. We also, a couple other things I want to share is that on October 18th, we will be holding a 4-hour virtual conference, Reimagine Buildings Decarb 101. So this is a overview of the key moves we need to make to do building decarbonization. So please join us for that, and also share it with others, maybe people who are newer to this world of building decarbonization and climate resilience and all that. And then on December 6th, we are joining forces with Chris Magwood of Rocky Mountain Institute to present Reimagine Buildings Carbon Storage, which will be really focused on embodied carbon. So stay tuned for both of those. And I'm super excited to be announcing that on October 1st, we will open our first membership community called Reimagine Buildings Collective. And that's where we're going to bring together building professionals who want to step up and tackle climate change so that we can create the healthiest buildings with the smallest carbon footprint, deliver them cost effectively and headache-free, or at least relatively headache-free, sell their benefits so they get built, and make a good living while doing it. So we're going to be coming together in community around that October 1st. If you're curious to see kind of the landing page of that and sign up for the waiting list, visit reimaginebuildings.com.
So much. And I'm going to be heading down to Wellington next week for the Passive House conference for Passive House Institute New Zealand. We've got a pretty incredible lineup of speakers there, including a whole bunch of past guests of the show, including people like Alex Slater. We've also got Alexia Litis, who's the CEO of Passive House Australia. Claire Parry's going to be there from Australia as well. Jane Henley, former CEO of the World Green Building Council. Jason Quinn, who will be well known to a lot of people. Joe Quad, he's a colleague of mine from the Green Building Council, talking about carbon. And of course, headlining our international lineup is also Lloyd Alter, who will be arriving in New Zealand this coming week. So really looking forward to hosting him in person, and many, many more. So if you're in Wellington, if you're in New Zealand, head down and check that out. It's at the Architecture School of Victoria University in Wellington.
Awesome.
All right. Lots going on. Great to have that program back up again, Zach. And we'll also be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.